Hello and welcome to the Journal. I'm Steve Kendall. It's an election year, 2022 in Ohio, for statewide offices, the state Senate, the state House. Of course, there's a U.S. Senate race. What that means, of course, Columbus will be alive with activity in a number of ways. And one of the things we like to do is bring on Karen Kasler, the host of the State of Ohio, seen each week on Sunday at noon here on WBGU-PBS, to talk about what's going to go on in Columbus and sort all of that out and a lot of the other things that are going on. Karen, welcome to the Journal once again.
So happy to be here, thanks.
Yeah, one of the things, and I noticed too, your show on Sunday, you talked about redistricting. There's been in the news in Ohio because Ohio, of course, in 2015, 2018 had ballot issues, and the public weighed in on what group should redraw the districts, which we have to do every 10 years. Redistricting's been a little complicated, so talk a little about how we started out and where we are right at the moment, knowing that sometime this week it's very possible that even the recently redrawn second time around maps may be challenged once again. So talk about what redistricting, where we stand right now in Ohio.
Well, Steve, as you'll recall, last year, the Ohio Redistricting Commission redrew the maps for the Ohio House and Senate. They were considered partisan gerrymanders by the Ohio Supreme Court. They awarded 67 House seats to Republicans and 23 Senate seats to Republicans, 67 out of 99, 23 out of 33. So there were groups that sued saying these were unconstitutional gerrymanders. The Ohio Supreme Court agreed with them. The Ohio Redistricting Commission also worked on a map for Congress, where we had to go from 16 districts down to 15. They've also been ruled as unconstitutional gerrymanders because it was thought that they would give 12 out of 15 seats to Republicans. That process is down the road a little bit. What happened over the weekend, this past weekend, was that the Redistricting Commission met again to redo Ohio's House and Senate legislative district maps. And so what ended up passing by a Republican-only party line vote, 57 Republican seats in the House, 42 Democratic seats, 20 Republican seats in the Senate, 13 Democratic seats. Now, the people who have been opposed to the map say that does not reflect Ohio's split of how voters have voted.
Right.
That voters have voted 54% to 46% Republicans versus Democrats, and that the maps really need to reflect that. And they've also said that there are maps that exist that reflect that split and also meet other constitutional criteria. Republicans dispute that. This is the maps they came up with. And now we're expecting any moment now for the opponents of those maps to file a lawsuit again in the Ohio Supreme Court trying to throw these maps out.
Now, and I know was it a surprise the Supreme Court ruled the first set of maps unconstitutional because the Republicans hold a majority on the Supreme Court? And I'm sure the thought was the Republicans will fall in line on the Supreme Court and find it constitutional, but that hasn't happened. So once again, these maps go to that same Supreme Court, and the trick is too, we're getting awfully close to May 3rd, the primary dates, and of course there are filing deadlines coming up to be eligible for the primary. So this is getting closer. Well, when we talked back in the fall, it was getting kind of close to the vest a little bit. Now we're literally just a month or so away from things, and it's still kind of up in the air.
Yeah, and I think Democrats always felt that this ruling would potentially happen because there was a period back during the budget process and when redistricting was being discussed, you'll recall the census results were delayed because of a variety of problems, including the pandemic and some issues with the Trump administration. And Republicans wanted to take it to the ballot and have voters decide some things about moving the constitutional deadlines on getting those maps. Democrats wanted to take that to the Ohio Supreme Court. And so it seemed like Democrats were already looking at the court as possibly being sympathetic for a couple of reasons. The main ones being, first of all, there is a Republican majority on the court, but it's only 4-3.
Right.
Which in previous years, it's been, the entire court has been Republican.
Right.
But also, along with those three Democrats, there's Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor, who is a Republican, but was really considered the swing and crucial vote here, and she turned out to be. She had voted against the maps that were drawn in 2011. And you might recall, for instance, the congressional map that we're under right now has the snake on the lake up near Lake Erie and has Jim Jordan's district going from Urbana all the way up to Oberlin, considered one of the most gerrymandered maps in the country. Maureen O'Connor had voted to throw out that map. She did not prevail. The majority prevailed in that. But Democrats always saw her, I think, as a potential swing vote to join their side. and I mean, you hate to think about judges being partisan, but they are.
That is
They
the
run
reality.
as partisan. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think that this was a decision that was pretty much expected.
Mm-hmm.
And so here we are now, just kind of waiting for the Supreme Court to do what it's going to do, because as you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
we have a primary coming up. And the filing deadline for legislative offices is February 3rd.
Right.
The filing deadline for congressional offices is in March. So we're running out of time for candidates who need to make decisions.
Sure. And at this point, nobody even knows what well, there's a map now that exists, so you roughly have an idea of what the legislative districts might look like, but it's not a done map until there'll be filings, the Supreme Court will weigh in once again, but at this point, it's still kind of up in the air, and that's disconcerting in any number of ways. Is there a chance that those deadlines, like the February 2nd filing, even the primary itself, could those be moved? Could those dates be changed? Because are they locked into in some way where are they in the Constitution, or are they simply a legislative adjustment? So can those dates be moved? Okay.
They are a legislative issue, and they're set right now for those dates, but they can be moved.
Okay.
And in fact, during this process, Secretary of State Frank LaRose, who voted for the maps along with his Republican colleagues, said, we're getting very close to having to do something to make this primary happen on May 3rd. We might have to move the primary. And that's been a discussion that a lot of folks have been having with regard to how to get these maps done right and have them communicated well and have the deadlines all match up. Will the primary have to be moved? I think that's something to keep an eye on. But you know, what's an interesting situation with the legislative maps, you actually have to live in your House or Senate district if you want to run for the state House, the state Senate. For the congressional districts, you don't have to live in the congressional district you want to run in. You just have to live in Ohio.
Right.
And so it's those legislative offices and those legislative candidates that really are looking at this to try to figure out, am I still in the district that I want to run in?
Yeah. And as you said, the window keeps getting narrower and narrower. One of the things too, and we're not the only state obviously doing redistricting. You know, Michigan redid theirs. Now they have a citizens panel, not an elected official group that does this. So, but yet even their maps have been challenged, even though theirs supposedly, allegedly, or at least on the surface, appeared to meet the Michigan constitutional rules better. But even those maps have been changed. But they're done by citizens selected, and I'm not sure what the process is, but they're not the elected official panel that does Ohio's redistricting maps. Yeah.
Right. And there had been an effort to try to do something about redistricting for really 10 or 15 years before we've actually been to this process where we are right now. And on our TV show, The State of Ohio, I talked with Catherine Terser, who was one of the driving forces for changing the Constitution in this process through her role at Common Cause Ohio. And she noted that Ohioans have had two opportunities to go to an independent commission, one in 2005 and one in 2012. And they rejected both of those both times. Now, there was a lot of money involved in persuading people on this, but she said that the attitude was that an independent commission would not be accountable to voters. But she said, here we have a Supreme Court decision that says the elected officials weren't accountable to the voters because they did not produce a map that really met constitutional requirements. So I think advocates are now thinking about what they want to do to clean up this process, because obviously some things need to change, because here we are struggling with trying to get this together on a deadline, and a lot of people are very concerned about whether it's going to happen.
Right. Well, when we come back, we can talk a little about the impact, because the governor, of course, was in favor, voted, was accepted that first set of maps. So we can talk about the effects on those races and the statewide races too. Back in just a moment with Karen Kasler, the host of the State of Ohio, here on The Journal. Thank you for staying with us on The Journal. Our guest is Karen Kasler, the host of the State of Ohio, seen every Sunday at noon here on WBGU-PBS. You know, we talked about the redistricting and all of that. The bottom line is the State of Ohio, statewide offices, a large number of offices are up in the November election, including the governor's race, the other statewide executive positions. Talk a little about the governor's race right now, because we talked about it in October. It was really early on. There wasn't a lot of definition. Obviously, the sitting governor, Mike DeWine, is going to run again. And so where does that stand right now as far as the governor's race is concerned on both the incumbent Republican side and then the Democratic challenger side?
Well, we have two primaries, and I think that's kind of unusual, especially when you're re-electing a governor potentially.
Right.
On the Republican side, Mike DeWine has not officially announced he's running, but he's running. He said he's going to run, and we've already seen some dark money groups starting to get in. There's a dark money group starting a big ad push this week on Fox News, a pro-DeWine dark money group, but you're going to possibly see some other ones, I think. The two opponents that he has been that he's going to face, Jim Renacci, the former Northeast Ohio congressman, and also Joe Blystone, who is a Central Ohio farmer and businessman. Both of them are running to the right of DeWine, heavily criticizing him for his COVID policies and just for his, what they see as his weakness on democratic issues and ties to President Joe Biden. And I think a lot of Republican candidates are going to run on Joe Biden's low approval ratings and things like inflation. And those are the issues that they're going to be running on. On the Democratic side for the governor's race, I think a lot of people might have thought that Nan Whaley, the mayor of Dayton, who's been running for a while, was going to be the nominee. Well, she has a challenger in Cincinnati's former mayor, John Cranley. So two former mayors from Southwest Ohio vying for the Democratic nomination. And both of them are very serious about this, that this is not, this is a neck and neck kind of race, I think, for both of them. They're working on the usual piling up endorsements and that sort of thing. But I will remind people, you know, even as you look at those offices, you've got the other statewide executive officers of Attorney General, Auditor, Secretary of State, Treasurer. Those are all on the ballot. Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court is on the ballot. Maureen O'Connor can't run again because you can't run if you're over 70 for the Supreme Court. And you also have the entire Ohio House, half the Ohio Senate, all of the U.S. House, and an open U.S. Senate seat. Big year. But to remind people, and this is not to throw cold water on Democrats here, this state has gone very Republican over the last two election cycles. So for instance, for a Democrat to win the governor's office or the open U.S. Senate seat is a really big hill to climb. Not saying it can't be done. Certainly anything can happen, but this state has been, Donald Trump won the state by 8 percentage points in 2016 and 2020.
Yeah. Now, and you mentioned Donald Trump, and I noticed on your show this past Sunday, you had the party chairs of the Republican and Democratic Party in the state of Ohio, and you know, strangely enough, the former president's name came up, and I gathered that there was I don't know he's going to weigh in obviously on certain races, probably the governor's race, probably obviously the Senate race, and it seemed as if there was a little bit of downplaying of his impact, which I think we should have learned by now that you never underestimate the impact of Donald Trump on anything. He's going to have some impact, but do you think we'll see various candidates move toward Donald Trump? I mean, it doesn't seem that it's beneficial to move away, but it put Mike DeWine in a rather interesting position because he did a lot of things that Donald Trump didn't really endorse in a lot of ways, but yet he's in a position where he is the incumbent, which is a good place to be generally. What do you think the impact of the former president will be in some of those statewide, well, the Senate race and the governor's race?
I don't think it's possible for some of the candidates in the Senate race to move closer to Donald Trump because they are as close as they could possibly be to Donald Trump. 5 of the 6 leading candidates on the U.S. Senate race for the Republicans have really pushed themselves as being very much Trump adjacent, following Trump's agenda. The one candidate that stands out in that race is State Senator Matt Dolan, who is not running as a Trump candidate. He says he told me that he would accept Donald Trump's endorsement, but is not seeking it out. And in fact, he's really pushed back on some of the things that the other candidates have said. For instance, the big infrastructure bill that passed the House and Senate, the U.S. House and Senate, it's bringing billions of dollars in infrastructure funding to Ohio and other states. He was the only one of the 6 leading candidates who said he would vote for it. The other candidates all said they wouldn't vote for it. And so I think among the 5, let's call them the Trumpy candidates on the U.S. Senate side, they're going to be running their campaigns against Joe Biden, but also very pro-Trump. And they're really, really hoping that they can get Trump's endorsement. Trump has said he will endorse in the U.S. Senate race, but has not said he's going to endorse in the primary. And I think that's key because he doesn't want to endorse the candidate that loses. And so one of these 6 candidates, and you know, there are more that are lesser candidates in terms of money and polling and profile, only one's going to win.
Right.
And the
Right.
question is whether Trump is going to get involved in that. When it comes to the governor's race, I'm certain that Jim Renacci, who has claimed that he has had ties to Trump for a while, is actively seeking Trump's endorsement. But once again, if indeed Mike DeWine does come out strong, spending the kind of money he has, and he has this big project that we're probably going to talk about here shortly, this Intel computer project to really promote, I don't know that Trump wants to get involved in a race where it looks like his candidate would be the one that would lose.
Right. Now, just back to the Senate race, who's the front runner at the moment? I know we're really speculating here, but who's the front runner in the Republican primary for U.S. Senate?
Well, in all of the internal polls that have happened, there really hasn't been a whole lot of widespread polling and reliable polling in this race, because you do have a lot of candidates.
Right.
And so far, the candidate that we've seen rising to the top in that race is Josh Mandel, the former state treasurer. Okay. He was the first out of the gate, so I'm not really surprised. And he's really hitting the base, doing a lot of campaigning in churches, in evangelical churches, trying to really shore up that base. Second and third has waffled between former Ohio Republican Party Chair Jane Timken, who's been doing more of the traditional grassroots campaigning, door-to-door kind of stuff. And then Mike Gibbons, Cleveland businessman who has spent millions of dollars on ads. I'm sure if any of your viewers are watching commercial television, you've seen them. Right. And those ads have really allowed his profile to rise up above the other ones. You've got Bernie Moreno, another Cleveland businessman who has been starting to run ads. He's starting to move up a little bit. And so these are, and then of course, J.D. Vance. We haven't really heard much from him. He's the author of Hillbilly Elegy, venture capitalist, kind of new in the Republican space, and has been taking some heat for that. Right. But he has a lot of ties at Fox News and with tech people around the country, a lot of money potentially behind him. So I think we're going to start seeing some of his ads starting up, and not just ads against him, which is what we've been seeing. And then of course, like I said, Senator Matt Dolan is behind. He started some ads as well. And so we're looking to see who actually comes out on top there.
Yeah. And one of the things that's been noticeable, at least in this part of the state, is that there have been attack ads against J.D. Vance. Because they've got quotes of him when he said basically not very nice things about Donald Trump, and they're pointing out he's not really a Republican, some of like the other candidates are saying. So it's interesting that they're trying to move him and say he's not really one of us. He's pretending to be. Yeah, and
those ads, if I'm remembering the ads that you're referencing, or I'm thinking of the same ones, they're run by the Club for Growth, which is a conservative group that backs Josh Mandel. And I think, that's one of the things that's frustrating, I think, for a lot of voters, is when you see an ad and you don't know who's behind it, and it really speaks out against someone rather than for someone. I think it's really frustrating to a lot of voters. But that's where a lot of the money in this race is. The most expensive U.S. Senate race in Ohio history was in 2012 between Sherrod Brown and Josh Mandel. More outside dark money was spent in that race than the candidates spent. And I could see something like that happening in this race as well.
Okay. Well, we come back. We want to talk about Intel, because that's a huge project for the state of Ohio. Back in just a moment with Karen Kasler, the host of the State of Ohio, here on The Journal. Thank you for staying with us here on The Journal. Our guest is Karen Kasler from the State of Ohio, program seen every Sunday at noon here on WBGU-PBS. The ongoing saga of House Bill 6 and the alleged bribery and all of that is still going on, and First Energy trying to figure out how it spent whatever money it got and that sort of thing, and what it spent it on, that sort of thing. Talk a little bit of House Bill 6, because it's still going, and it's going into an election year now. And I know that the Democratic Party chair on your show on Sunday said, we think this is an issue that people need to hear more about. So they're going to try and leverage that against every Republican candidate in the state. So talk about House Bill 6, the ongoing controversy, the ongoing investigations.
Well, as we're doing this program right now, the Ohio Democratic Party is having a call where they're talking about the idea of bringing up House Bill 6 and all the issues surrounding that in candidates' campaigns. And to remind people what House Bill 6 is, it's the law that was passed in 2019 that bailed out Ohio's 2 nuclear power plants and also provided subsidies for 2 coal-fired power plants. It made major changes and really eliminated energy efficiency and certain renewable energy standards for Ohio's electric utilities. And so the nuclear subsidies have been pulled back. Those were supposed to be adding to every single Ohioan's electric bill, not just First Energy customers, all Ohioans' electric bills, $1 billion over 10 years. And so that's all been pulled back. Now lawmakers are considering pulling back on the subsidies for coal-fired power plants, which actually had been around for a long time, but were just put into House Bill 6 as part of the overall package. So they're thinking about doing that, especially since one of those coal-fired power plants is actually in Indiana. And so I think that there's a preparation for the House Bill 6 stuff to be coming out in campaigns as everybody runs for office, like we were just talking about. But also on the TV show this past weekend, the state of Ohio, Bob Paduchik, who's the Republican Party chair, said in response to Democratic Party Chair Liz Walters' idea that they're going to really push House Bill 6 and the scandal, the corruption scandal that's related to that. He says he doesn't think it's going to matter. He doesn't think it's going to play because in 2020, when the whole scandal broke and former Speaker Larry Householder was arrested, the former chair of the Ohio Republican Party, Matt Borges, was arrested, Paduchik points out that really didn't even have an impact on the 2020 elections. So why would it have an impact 2 years later? But certainly it's going to be the kind of thing that Democrats are going to try to use. Whether it's going to be successful is a real issue. Democrats have tried to use corruption in the state house as an issue in campaigns for years, going back to ECOT, the online charter school scandal. You might remember CoinGate a couple years ago. Well, more than a decade ago.
Close to home up here. Yeah.
And those issues really, those scandals really didn't track. They really didn't catch voters' attention. Voters were more concerned, as they probably might be this year, about things like inflation. However, I think the idea of a federal trial going on, which is expected to happen this year, where former Speaker Larry Householder and former Republican Party Chair Matt Borges are expected to go to trial. They've maintained their innocence in this bribery case. That trial could, depending on when it happens, could be a big factor.
Could change that to an impactful part of the election.
Could be.
But now, real quick, because I know we want to get to Intel because that's a huge story for the state. But Democrats voted for House Bill 6, a significant number of them. So it's difficult to say, wow, what a terrible thing. Well, yes, I actually did vote for it when it came up. And it puts you in an interesting position to argue the other guys are really corrupt, but I guess I voted for it too. So it's a difficult
And I think a lot of Democrats will say that they voted for it because it was the idea of a broad energy portfolio. It was important to shore up those nuclear power plants. But absolutely, if they want to pull that up, Republicans could certainly push back and say, hey, there were plenty of Democrats who voted for this.
You voted for it too, And on your show, and I know on Sunday you talked about Intel, which is probably, it is obviously the biggest investment in the state of Ohio in the state's history from an outside company. And that's a big story because basically almost every other state in the country was competing for this particular Intel chip producing plant. So that's a huge story for everybody, and everybody's going to take credit for it, obviously, from a representative who is nowhere near the plant to the President of the United States is taking credit for it. Obviously, the governor's taking credit for it. So talk about Intel. That's a huge story. It's a great story for the state.
It's massive. It is potentially going to be the largest semiconductor computer chip manufacturing facility in the world. In central Ohio. And I know that there's some frustration on the part of some people, especially in the Cleveland area. Why did Central Ohio get it? Central Ohio already is the fastest growing economy in the state and that sort of thing. But I think that there were a lot of factors that played into this. The available land. I mean, so far, 3,600 acres, 5.6 square miles. A huge tract of land has been annexed from Licking County to New Albany for this project. Two of these fabrication plants, or fabs as they call them, will be built on 1,000 acres of that land. But the expansion opportunity is huge. And obviously, you're talking about 7,000 construction jobs potentially. You're talking about 3,000 actual employees working at Intel. The average salary of these employees is expected at $135,000 a year. These are really big, great jobs. There's concern, of course, for the housing market, for the environmental impact that such a large campus could have. But there's real excitement, I think, on the part of a lot of people in Ohio, because this is the kind of stuff that people had wanted to be bringing to the Midwest, and to shed that whole Rust Belt image, as Senator Sherrod Brown said during the Intel announcement. We're looking more toward the Silicon Valley and being, as Intel's CEO said, the Silicon Heartland. And so it's really exciting and transformative, most likely.
Yeah, and you're right. And for one thing, because this is Ohio's step into that moving into the future look versus, yes, we've got another auto plant. Nothing wrong with that, but this is the ultimate in technology, cutting edge, leading edge, bleeding edge technology. And yeah, it's Silicon Valley coming to Ohio. And it's going to change New Albany, obviously, completely, but that's progress, I guess. Yeah.
And actually, that's I live in the general area of that. And so I'm a little concerned about traffic and things like that. But certainly the impact on the economy is huge. And it's not just on Intel. And certainly Intel got a lot of state incentives to come here. We're still trying to find out. The state has admitted to $1 billion in incentives, but hasn't really said how it's going to be used. But it's also the possibility of the economic impact from businesses that will develop to help with the supply chain, restaurants and housing and all these things that will be built around that area. Because when you bring in that many people, especially people who are going to be making good money, there are a lot of businesses that want to have a part of that.
Yeah, they're going to be spending money too. So yeah, that's all we have time for this time around. But again, obviously, Karen, thank you so much for being here, and we'll obviously touch base with you as we get closer to May primary time, February, March, all of those things, because obviously Columbus is going to be pretty active over the next couple of months, as it always is, I guess. So thanks again for being here on the Journal.
Anytime, Steve. Thanks.
Okay, all right. And you can check us out at WBGU.org. And of course, you can watch us every Thursday night at 8 o'clock on WBGU PBS. We will see you next time on the Journal. Good night and good luck.